So for those that are joining, my name is Keith Boswell. I'm the VP of Marketing here at ADHD Online. And part of what we've been doing here in 2022 is really trying to reach out to the community more and provide access to more resources and experts in our network. And part of what we wanted to do tonight through our network was bring someone to you during tax season. But for the ADHD community, tax season this year is most likely over. You've probably already got things in motion. And so we want to make sure we set things up for next year. So Rick Webster is here from Rena-Fi.com. Rick is the CEO and former real estate entrepreneur, and has spent a lot of time focusing on teaching people about behavioral finance. So we're going to talk about that tonight. We also want to make sure we open this up to questions. So we encourage you throughout the webinar tonight to ask questions. We want this to be as informative for you as possible. And just want to thank you all in advance for getting started. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Rick, and we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, I am somewhat amused at your optimism. I would bet that 3/4 of our audience right now has not wrapped up their taxes yet. And
yeah, and myself included.
Myself included. A lot of us will wrap it up on the last day, that, you know, the party at midnight at the post office, which is kind of a thing of the past, but basically it's the same kind of thing. So that is what it is in the ADHD community. We dramatically discount the future in favor of the present. And if it's not now, it's irrelevant almost. And so pretty soon getting the taxes done will become now, and they'll be due tomorrow when we'll get them done. There'll be a certain percentage of us who actually won't get them done, and even another percentage that hasn't gotten them done for 3 or 4 or 5 years or longer. So this is it's an insidious problem in the ADHD world. It's all part of that ADHD tax, which we'll bring up. And obviously that's a euphemism, but it's the real thing. It's not a tax, but it's the extra money that we end up paying. So I want to start off with, you know, I am the CEO of Rena-Fi. I am not a tax advisor, and this is not tax advice. This talk is going to be very generalized. And while I believe the information to be accurate, I would suggest anything that you want to rely on that you hear here today, that you double check it with a tax advisor. And these days, you don't really need to go pay someone $150 for a little bit of advice. You can Google it, make sure you're looking at the right, you know, a solid entity that's putting the advice out there, and that would be a way. You want to double check things before you rely on it. Rena-Fi really is an educational platform, and we're devoted to the ADHD community, addressing the additional complications that are the result of ADHD. The stats that ADHD seem to fall on are both sides of a bell curve. Some of us are doing fantastically well, others of us are doing very poorly. And it is the matter of remediating the ADHD, which is extremely important. 61% of us, there's no shame and character issue associated with money other than what people have artificially applied to that. Mismanagement of money is not a character issue. It just isn't. So 61% of us, though, according to Russell Barkley, a consummate researcher, are struggling to stay afloat. 61% of us have chronic and significant financial stress in our lives. And financial stress isn't just a phrase. It actually means something. There's a definition to these things, and I can define some of that if you wanted to, but people who are under significant and chronic financial stress, which is 61% of us, have their life expectancy shortened by an average of 12 years. It's huge. Russell Barkley talks about the shortening of life expectancy in the ADHD community. A huge, maybe 2/3 of that is attributable to financial stress. It's not the ADHD itself that's causing life to be shortened. It's the interface between us and the world and our ways of doing it. So I'm delighted to be here. One of the things I get asked about the most, actually. And I'm not paid to be here. I met the people at ADHD Online, and I really like what they stand for and what they're doing. One of the things I like most about what I've read with them and been talking to them is that one of the questions I get asked the most is, how do I find a good medical provider? How do I get diagnosed? It's just one of those catch-22s. If you didn't have ADHD, it would be a lot easier to do. And if you didn't have money problems, it certainly would be a lot easier to do. But these things all add up to people not getting the help that they need year after year after year. And that all adds up to this financial stress, which reduces life satisfaction and actual life expectancy. So I think this is the future. I think the future is diagnosis online, counseling and treatment online. Nothing is free, it just isn't that way, but this is the way to have something scalable, which is the way to bring prices down. So finding help really shouldn't break the bank and make your problems worse. And so I'm really pleased to be here tonight. I was really pleased to be invited by that ADHD Online. So thank you.
Yeah,
Keith.
we really believe that too. I think the economics and access are really key things for us. And, you know, again, really appreciate you taking time out of your day to spend with our audience to talk about these things, because we know finance is such a huge weight on all of our patients.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really true. And it's interesting. This is what I do. I'm delighted to be here. You know, one of the things about life satisfaction and work satisfaction, I won't get too far off track, but I think it's germane to making money. It's why we make less money, because we don't find those things with life satisfaction. I think it's important to become a thank God it's Monday person. Thank God I get to go back to work and do what I love and it has meaning and purpose in my life, as opposed to, oh my God, I'm glad it's over. Thank God it's Friday, right? If you're so looking forward to the weekend, you need to rethink your career. You know, sorry, but that's just what it needs to be. There's a reason why so many of us with ADHD are self-employed, because we're looking for something with meaning and purpose, and we feel like we're constrained. It's hard to go from the mailroom to the top of the corporate ladder, and you know, we want to skip a few steps, which frankly I think is good for us. So there are concerning statistics, you know, negative outcomes, and I don't want to go down the negative path too much. I just want this to be clear how important it is to get our money things correct. It really doesn't have to be that way. Rena-Fi, our company, and yours too, exists to change. For us, it's financial outcomes. For you, it's mental health outcomes. But we're looking to change, and I think there's a perfect synergy here. So let me just say, you know, before we get started, I could talk for hours about these things. It's a passion for me, but I would rather respond to your questions. You know, anybody in the audience that has a question, just put it in the chat window or the Q&A, and Keith will read it to me. I'm not too good at reading while I'm talking, but the conversation will be more engaging, and therefore it will be more effective if we address your questions directly. And frankly, I'd rather have a more spontaneous talk. I think, you know, first of all, it'll be more effective, but I'll enjoy it more too. So, and you guys might as well. So I came prepared with a talk. Don't worry, if everybody's quiet, I can talk for a long time, but I would love to address specifically what you guys are interested in.
Well, Rick, I'm always fascinated. You talk about the merits of behavioral finance, right? And can you just tell us a little bit about what that is, just to kind of help set the context for the audience?
Absolutely. And I think it's a great place to start, because let's talk about an interesting reality when it comes to anything to do with our finances, or really almost any other decision we take in life. For everything we want to do, there are mechanical aspects of getting something done. Right? In the case of tax preparation today that we're going to be talking about, that might include having a checklist of all the required elements and a list of your banks and your securities accounts and the charitable organizations that you've donated to, a list of all the sources of income that you have. And it might, more mechanical would be having a filing system where you keep your 1099s, W-2s, interest paid statements, all those things that you have, interest paid, whatever you've received on income or paid out. So those are mechanical aspects, and I think we all understand them. They're not complex. We don't need to be a rocket science. We get a hold of a checklist and we run down it. They're mechanical, what I would call rational aspects that are generally not all that complex, and they are really not the problem. If I move this over into the dieting world, to tell someone, you know, that's overweight and wants to lose weight, you know, just eat less and exercise more, everything will be fine. And we know that doesn't work. If that worked, there wouldn't be a problem. It just doesn't work. And then the world comes back around and shames the person for not eating less and exercising more, or doing what they think is really simple. What is simple to one person might be very difficult, if not impossible, to someone else. So these I consider the mechanical aspects. And we either do those things ourselves or we hire a professional to do them for us. These days, we can hire an application to do it. On the surface, they look so easy, and they even look easy to us. So then we're really puzzled and oftentimes ashamed of ourselves for having problems with these things that look so easy from the outside. You know, and Keith, I noticed you're wearing glasses. I wear glasses to read as well. It's very much like when you shame someone like that, it's really like saying, well, I don't understand why you can't see. I don't need glasses to see. Why do you need glasses to see? You know, there must be something wrong with you. The fact is, we have different needs and we have different abilities. So if we need glasses, there's no character thing about that. And if we need better systems to manage our money, there's nothing, you know, character involved about that either. So I think the mechanical aspects are like 10%. It's necessary. We need to be able to have a good budget. We need to be able to have the discipline and the forethought and you know, look into the future. We have to be able to do all those things. But the reason we're not doing them is not because we don't understand how to do them. The reasons are deeper and emotional. They're habitual aspects of getting ourselves to do pretty much anything. Every behavior is difficult because what we see, the change we want to see, is just the tip of the iceberg. Hey, I want to go to the gym 3 times a week. Sounds easy. Just go down there. What we don't understand is underneath the surface, and I'll mix metaphors here, underneath the surface of this tip of the iceberg is an entire root system holding you in place. It's everything you know. It's everything that your mind sees holding you in place. So making a very simple change, like going to the gym 3 days a week, is actually really difficult. Making a simple change, like creating a filing system and consistently putting your papers into that filing system, is very difficult. It's much more difficult than it looks. And we need to let ourselves off the hook a little bit. It's not easy. It doesn't mean we don't have to figure out how to do it, but we need to realize. So we understand how difficult they are. Other things, you know, rationally, we realize that we need more sleep. Maybe we need to higher quality sleep. Thinking that all we have to do is implement an earlier bedtime and create an environment conducive to sleep hygiene is missing a big part of the piece. And, you know, in my financial world, we talk about how to curb our impulsive shopping appetites and how to save a larger percentage of our income. It's more than just rational academics. There's an emotional component to it, which is far weightier. Jonathan Haidt has a metaphor. He's a social psychologist on some East Coast university. He talks about the elephant in the rider metaphor, and you guys can just Google it, elephant and rider, click on images. You'll see that the emotional mind is the 10,000-pound elephant. And later in our evolution came the rational mind, which is the 140-pound rider up on top. Your 140-pound rider says, well, of course I need to start saving for retirement. Your elephant says, no, I really don't want to do that. I want to go out to dinner with my friends, right? And so and the rational mind isn't going to win that argument, right? It's 140 pounds against 10,000. So the rational mind is there to help the emotional mind get what it wants in a socially acceptable way.
Right.
So
well, you know, we've already got a couple of questions come in,
Great.
Rick. This one, they kind of flow right into what you're talking about. So Annie asked, even the thought of taxes hurts my head. I want to ignore it forever, but I don't, but I want to. Do you have any tips as to how to reframe it in my mind to make it not seem so daunting?
Yes, and perfect segue. I'm glad she asked that question. And I appreciate you're looking at the chat window because I'm not very good at looking at both at the same time. One way to make it less daunting is to create a system. You know, one thing we talk about at Rena-Fi is there's goals and there's systems. Goals are not the way to achieve things. Everybody has to have a goal, but every NFL team thought they had a goal of winning the Super Bowl. That didn't happen for most of them. It only happened for one. The reason it happened for the one and for the ones that did really well is they had really good systems in place. And if you want to get your taxes to be less onersome and less anxiety producing and less depressing, there's a whole lot of emotional components to this. The way to do that is to break it down into very small steps. I know I used to hear all this advice about breaking things into steps and it just went right by me. So that's silly. I don't need to do that. The fact is it really works. We're struggling with our taxes right now. What this talk is about will be a little bit about how to get those done and done on time, but we should be starting to prepare for our 2022 taxes right now, even though the year's not over. We should do a bunch of things, really do ourselves a favor. We need to create, and this is some things that they're kind of mechanical, but they're also designed to reduce the anxiety and this dread that we feel about these things. I'm really tempted, and maybe you can remind me, Keith, a little bit later. I want to talk about procrastination and why it happens, because a big part of why people don't get their taxes done is they put it off until the thing is just screaming in their ear, and then they maybe get it done, maybe not. So if you start right now, you're doing your taxes anyway, so you're already involved. If you start right now, kind of in parallel, and create a file, it can just be a manila folder. It can just be an envelope. It could be the proverbial shoebox. It doesn't matter. Start a file on next year's taxes, 2022's taxes that you'll file in 2023. The reason that taxes are a nightmare right now is probably because you didn't prepare. All year long, you've been sitting back and, yeah, it's not now. I'm not going to worry about it. It's irrelevant. Now it's caught up to us. And now we're saying, oh my gosh, it's already March 7th. And I don't have my W-2 form from my flaky employer. I don't have a 1099 from some of the people I work for. I can't file my taxes without them. And I didn't ask for them, and they're supposed to send them automatically. And they have problems too. So I don't have it. Now I have a big problem. So if you start now and have a file, and it helps to have a checklist in that file. And the checklist, I think we have a couple of them on Rena-Fi.
We put them up, and we put those both up in the chat window as well, so people can find them.
And they're not comprehensive lists. They're just something to get you started. But if you have a checklist, you know what goes into that file. Every time something happens, like you donate money to, anything, the ACLU, you donate $300 to ACLU, you put the little sticker, the little tab, the email they sent you, whatever it is, into the folder, so that when it comes time to figure all those things out, you have it all there together. And some of them will become irrelevant. It's okay. The folder will have papers in it that actually, that donation to the ACLU, presumably you put that on a credit card or a debit card. So you have an electronic record of it. We're going to talk about that too. If anybody is not, if anybody's still using cash, and I know there's financial trainers already out there, still out there telling people with ADHD to use cash, it is the worst thing you could be doing. Just knock it off, right? And we'll talk about that too. Maybe you can remind me. Cash is the worst thing. It is not harder to spend than a credit card. That's what they keep saying, and it's nonsense. And I will poke holes in that, given the chance a little bit later. But start a folder. Sorry, my Adderall must be rubbing off. I can hear that I'm going off on tangents. So just bring me back in when I do, because there's a ton of stuff to talk about here. But start right now with a folder for 2022 taxes. Don't get it mixed up with your 2021, right? I know we're in 22, but you're now preparing to pay taxes in 2023 for 2022. So create a folder, anything. It's really simple. And every time something relevant to your tax life comes in, put it in the folder. And if there's nothing printed or written or email or anything like that you could just print out, then just write a note to yourself. On such and such a date, I did such and such a thing, and for X number of dollars, just write it down so you can remind yourself. And you might even say, paid for by check number 2027, or paid for by my Bank of America credit card, whatever it happens to be. So it's easy to find. The key here is to start with easy things. I want to talk a minute about habit formation, because that's, without good habit formation, all this falls apart. I think I got this from James Clear's Atomic Habits, which is a fantastic book. I would suggest anybody take a read of that. It's a really good book. What he talks about, and this is counterintuitive. I just had a coaching client go through this, which is why I now have that story. He needed to clean his garage. He hadn't done it for like 3 years. It was a disaster, right? I never saw it, but it was a disaster. And he got busy on it about 10 o'clock at night. And it was a 6-hour job. And he worked until 4 in the morning. And then the next day was awful because he had sleep deprived and everything else, big problem. And what that meant was the next time that garage is a mess, he's going to remember that as an onerous, awful event. And he's going to dread it. And he's not going to want to go do it. What James Clear says, and I hope it was his book, I think it was, he says, no, quit before you're ready to quit. It's counterintuitive. If he had said to himself, I got a good 2 hours in me here that I would like to work on that garage, and I'm going to set a timer for 90 minutes. And at 90 minutes, I'm going to be done. I'm quitting in 90 minutes. I'm going to go in, have dinner, watch TV, whatever it happens to be. Because then what happens is the person says they're almost eager the next day. Oh my gosh, I left that project half done. It wasn't very hard. I worked for an hour and a half and it went really fast. They're going to be eager to go back and do it. And now they've done it twice in a row or 3 times in a row. And pretty soon the project gets done, but also they've established a habit. Doing something once does not establish a habit. Doing something multiple times on a routine basis, especially connected up to some other habit, will really form that habit. So when we talk about our taxes, doing them at the last minute just means you're going to dread it next year. But if you do it all year long, it's a non-event. You know, part of the little blurb, I think, for you guys was make April 15th a non-event, right? Just do a little of it all year long. Just stick the papers in there. At the end of the year, you don't even have to do it if you don't want. Pay somebody, but you know, you've got it all together.
Well, yeah. And, it's really interesting when you said that about April 15th being just another day, it reminds me of, that's kind of like, it's a mythical day when we're growing up. I mean, it's this big, scary day. The big IRS is going to check your numbers and, you might get audited. And there's just this fear that's kind of instilled from you from a very early age about April 15th.
Yeah, there's a Big Brother aspect of it. George Orwell, Big Brother stuff. There's an aspect of that. I can tell you, and this is a little bit ancillary too, if you've got tax problems, the IRS, they want to talk to you and not to beat you up. They want you to become a good tax-paying citizen. They want you back in the fold. They're not trying to break you. If they levy your account, it's because you forced them to. They're charged, that's their duty. They're charged with collecting the government's taxes, right? You might not like that, but that's their job. But they will do everything. They will bend over backwards to help you get back on track. I just talked to someone today, because it's what we do, who owes like $2,600, and she's been kind of hiding in those penalties of probably $800 of that $2,600 are penalties. And so no, you call up the IRS and say, I'm in a bad situation. I don't have the money. Most likely they'll give you 6 months deferral. That's easy to get usually. And if you do have some money, you say, no, I can give you $25 a month. I know that won't do it, but at least I'm making some progress. Once you've done that, and you have an installment agreement with them, they will stop charging you penalties. The interest will continue because you haven't paid them, right? It's like a credit card, you haven't paid them, but they'll start charging the penalties. It's like a credit card. Credit card will charge you interest when you owe a balance, but they won't charge you penalties as long as you pay them on time. The IRS is the same way. They will make a deal, and then, of course, you can't make a deal that you don't keep. They won't be very happy about that, but they're very eager to make a deal with you. And you just, don't promise more than you can deliver. That's the main thing about them. But they really are. I don't even know if they were horrible in the old days, but they have a reputation for it. They are not horrible. I can't say the same thing about state taxes. I'm in California. They could care less what happens to you. They just want their money. So you have to deal with them a little bit differently. But even then, it's better to raise your hand and say, I have a problem, than to hide from them. They will find you, right? They will find your bank account. They'll find your property. So don't make them go to those lengths.
Yeah. All right. Well, we got another question in the Q&A from Jill. Jill said, I'm self-employed in the telehealth behavioral health system, lived in many different states, and it's my first year with both understanding what it's like to live with ADHD and being self-employed. I learn best by having people explain something to me, but don't want to be a burden to anyone else. How and where might I start in not just money management, but in filing taxes? Because the taxes especially seems quite scary at the moment.
Yeah, so telehealth, I'm imagining a 1099 independent contractor. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Most likely.
That's most likely. So it's the problem, and I hate to say that it's a problem. The issue with being 1099 as opposed to an employee is that you don't have anybody withholding taxes and things for you. If you're a W-2 employee, your gross pay says 3,000, but they only give you 2,200, right? So that money is being taken out. And if you've established correct withholding exemptions and stuff, it should come out fairly even, hopefully within 10%. Otherwise, they could charge you a penalty, but it should come out fairly even. The problem for 1099 people is they're independent contractors. I have independent contractors that work with me at Rena-Fi, and they earn $500. I send them $500. I don't send them 425 and send the other 75 to, cover their Social Security and all those other things, because they are literally, it's like hiring a separate company. When you're an independent contractor, you are essentially acting as an independent company. And I will say a lot of companies skirt the lines, and if they start, there's a whole bunch of tests that identify whether you are indeed a 1099 worker. If any of your work fails those tests, you are by de facto, you are now an employee, and that can put them on the wrong side of the fence sometimes. But yeah, the bottom line to it that I see is that you've got to be your own tax withholding person. You've got to file your quarterly taxes, probably, depending, and you have to take, the lead on those kind of things. So I would tend to say, find a way to automate that. And I don't actually know how you would do that specifically, but I can't imagine that it can't be done.
I mean, and just from my own experience, when I've been a 1099 contractor, I just kind of would estimate high and then just put that money in a separate account as soon as I was paid, because if I thought of it as income in any way, it was dangerous, right? Because it is that, like, oh my gosh, now you're playing catch up on potentially hundreds or thousands in taxes. If you don't kind of set that aside at the time.
Yes. And another thing about the behavioral finance, if you look up behavioral finance, you'll see that it's actually meant for global economies and stuff, and we're applying it to the individual, which more and more is happening. But if you look at behavioral finance, you'll see that the ADHD world is right in there. It's now versus not now. And if it's not now, it's irrelevant. So if you've been saving that money and you've got like $3,000 saved up in your account earmarked for taxes, guess what? Your taxes aren't due for 9 more months. And if you don't pay them, there's some kind of penalty that's fuzzy in your mind. And you say, well, my car's breaking down. I think I'm going to go buy a new car. And I bet you I can put $3,000 down on that car and walk and drive out of there with a $30,000 car, right? So now you've compounded the problem. You've used the tax money, which you would have to really sprint to catch up with. And now you've got a car payment to go with it. And I'm not saying buying the car is the wrong choice, but I do think it's the wrong choice to take money that's earmarked for a purpose as important as paying your taxes and let it go. So we really need to be mindful of those things more than most. ADHD is not a psychiatric condition, right? I mean, that ADHD is a neurological brain function difference. It is not psychiatric. It is not like anxiety and depression. There are physical differences in the brain. And so we need to counteract those things with our systems. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. It's a known fact. We discount the future more than it should be discounted. Everyone should discount a little bit, right? You don't want to save all of your money for when you're 65. You might get hit by a bus when you're 50, right? You should enjoy your life, but we don't want to discount the future so much that when you go to retire, you have no money. And the same thing about saving for taxes. Realize, just become mindful intellectually, if it doesn't hit you emotionally, that I really need this money done. I don't want to go stressing over not having the money. I don't want to pay the penalties. I don't want to pay the interest. Really get in touch with the drawback of what your future self is going to go through if your current self squanders that $3,000.
Right. Well, that actually reminds me to come back to you mentioned procrastination and the ADHD brain and taxes. This seems like this kind of what you were alluding to earlier, maybe, or.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because procrastination is a huge problem in the ADHD community. It's a huge problem with paying taxes. And if you've procrastinated setting aside, let's just say $1,000 a month for 12 months, the odds that you're going to be able to come up with $12,000 for your taxes at the very end is nil, right? So it's a huge issue. Someone else, and I've forgotten her name, in the very beginning talks about when she thinks about taxes, she gets all kind of stressed out, right? I forgot what her term was for that, but we do. So procrastination is not laziness. It's not a character issue. I'm not saying it couldn't be, but 99.9% of the time, it is not a character issue. Procrastination is a mood repair device that we have. And metaphorically, if you're in a weather system, hang in there with me for a minute, in a weather system, you have high pressure areas and low pressure areas. And when you have a high pressure area, the wind, the air goes over to the low pressure because it's trying to equalize, right? The air in some anthropological, it doesn't like it, the high pressure, right? It wants to zip over to where it's lower pressure because it's trying to equalize things. With procrastination, we're usually faced, one more thing. When you say the night before you're going to do something the next day, it seems really easy. Well, of course I'm going to make that phone call. It's a natural thing. It's all intellectual. The next day, though, when you're getting close to that phone call, you start feeling a little bit of anxiety. You start feeling some dread. You feel like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I'm up for this. I don't know if I can do what people are going to judge what I have to say. Maybe I won't have the money for my taxes. Maybe I'll get it wrong and they'll audit me and things like that. So there's all kinds of emotional things tying into this. And that's the high pressure. And then you've got something else over here, which is probably productive. That's how we fool ourselves, like cleaning the garage or doing the dishes or mowing the lawn or writing a blog post, something that's productive, but it's not the highest and best use of your time. And so we tend to say, oh my gosh, I really don't want to do this. I'm not sure why. I don't want to do the taxes today. I feel dread. I'm going to do something else that's productive. You might go to the beach. That's another form of procrastination, which we can talk about. But most people will do something productive. It's just a lower level of that. And we fool ourselves because we say, yeah, I really don't feel like doing it today. I'm not sure why. I don't feel like it. But tomorrow I'll feel like it. It's not true. Tomorrow, you're saying it to yourself without all the emotional content. Tomorrow, you'll be faced with that project, which you said was going to be easy, but now you're faced with all the emotional content again. And not only do you have that, but now you have a history of a day or two or a year that you haven't been doing it. So we get these really well-worn pathways, these kind of escapes from the high pressure into the lower pressure. And we pay a huge price for that going down the road. One of the things that can help avoid that, another scenario is, let's suppose you've got your, I don't even know what they cost. Say you've got your $10,000 and you want to buy a Range Rover, and let's say it's a $100,000 vehicle. I have no idea, but I bet you can walk into a dealership with good credit and buy a Range Rover, a $100,000 car for $10,000 down. And it's a status symbol, and you don't feel very good about your life. It's like going home and eating the entire chocolate cake in the refrigerator. It makes you feel better somehow, right? So, but you drive out of there with basically a $90,000 debt in your pocket, right? And with this status symbol car, which is going to plummet in value, but it felt good when you bought it. Nice leather seats, whatever they have. The way to avoid that, because that's mood repair too, is to get in touch with your future self 3 years from now and say, what am I going to be thinking when I've paid this loan from 90 down to 80? My car, which was worth 100, is now worth 60. So I owe 20,000 more than it's worth. I can't even sell it and get out even. And I'm writing a check for $1,200 to the bank again, which is including at least some interest and stuff. So how is my future self going to think about it? If you can really get in touch with that, then you can make a rational decision. Do I want to do it or not? And it might be, the answer might be yes. But at least if you look at yourself down the road 3 years and say, am I okay with that? And if you say, no, I'm really not okay with that. I think I'd rather go buy a cheaper car or fix the one I have. Maybe there's other uses. Maybe I'd rather pay off my student loans than pay $1,200. Maybe I'd rather buy a house than pay, $1,200 for a car payment.
I mean, that makes so much sense because it kind of allows you to separate yourself from the emotional draw of the now, right? That feels so good, but then all the things that come along with it after.
Yep. The now, which is all we have, I guess, in some sense, but living in the present exclusively is almost like taking a narcotic. It makes you feel good for a few moments. I mean, I don't know. I'm a child of the 70s, but I don't know what the harder stuff is, but it makes you feel good for a little bit, but it compromises your future dramatically. So most of us say, no, I'm not going to do that. So we have to learn to do that with other things like buying the $100,000 vehicle. It may make us feel better, right? We get to brag to our neighbors and we have this illusion that our neighbors are going to be really impressed when actually our neighbors say, well, that was really stupid, but they won't tell you, right? So I think it really does come back to mood repair. Procrastination and this is science-based, is actually a factor of mood repair. And when you're procrastinating, you're not doing something which is actually really important to your long-term financial health or any other health. It's really important to kind of sit and introspect and say, what am I feeling right now? Why don't I want to do this? Last night, I thought it was a great idea. Now I just, now I'm trying to postpone it for tomorrow. Why don't I want to do it? And if we can get in touch with that, we can begin to rebalance the equation.
Makes a lot of sense. So I would encourage people to continue to ask questions in the chat or Q&A. So Rick, just helping the audience think about this year and next year, like what other tips would you
Yeah.
suggest?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, this was supposed to be about preparing taxes.
No, but this is kind of,
It's all
it's kind of
interrelated.
the way it works. Yeah. And it's like, and then being responsive to the audience, I think it's always,
Yeah,
like you said, we want to focus on that, but yeah, what else can we help them with this year or next to
absolutely,
be
absolutely,
successful?
absolutely. And it is all interwoven. You tweak one piece, other things get worse or better depending on which way you're going with things. So let's get back to the tax thing just a little bit. I would say start planning for next year's taxes right now. That's partly what we started off talking about. Get these things organized, get a tax planner, start putting papers, have a place to put those papers, even if you don't have them. Not planning ahead, get in touch with what that's going to cost you, not planning ahead. People with ADHD, that's that ADHD tax, not actually a tax, but that's the losses we pay for non-sufficient funds fees and penalties and all the things, missed job opportunities and all that. We pay a huge penalty for that. So we want to get in touch. Some of the things that the IRS actually tells us, and they're the authority, right? They will say, take action when changes occur. Right? As you go through, you've got your filing system and something changes. Maybe one of your kids, I don't know, moves out, gets a great job and is no longer a dependent. Note that down, right? Take action of at least recording what is happening and when it's going to happen. A big reason that doing taxes at the end of the year is so onerous is because we don't know where all the stuff is. It's not just a matter of filling in a form. Oh my gosh, I remember I worked for that company and I made $1,200 or whatever it is. I donated $1,200 somewhere, but we don't have the paperwork anymore. So we spend 3 times as much time. I don't know how much more time, but we spend a ton more time looking for the stuff that would have been really easy if we took care of it in the moment that it happened, right? Yeah, we talked about independent contract. I pay independent contractors. If I didn't write down all year long, but I do it, through a banking system. But if it wasn't recorded all year long, I would have a heck of a time figuring out what I paid John Doe. I would have no idea. So I can't just file my taxes. I have to figure that out first. So it's really good to take action when the changes occur. And you can amend your withholding allowances if you want to. There's a form for, I think it's called a W-4. You just go to the IRS website. It's actually pretty well laid out. And change your, you find out what your allowances should be and then go to your employer and change them. The IRS actually has a withholding calculator tool as well. You just put that in the search engine and you'll get it. I think it's really important to keep your records safe. My sister lives in an area which is more and more subject to major fires in Northern California. It's really important to keep the records safe. If you've got a whole bunch of papers, which frankly, I don't recommend too much. We're going to talk about getting off of papers. I think that's a poor place to keep your things. But if you do, make sure that you've got copies, make sure that your papers are in a reasonably safe location and that. And also, if you're a couple, make sure that your significant other knows where that file is too, because you're both doing things. And so make sure that you're both participating. And, we talked about the downside of ADHD. One of them is relationship implosions. And one of those is hiding and not telling your significant other what's going on and stuff. So the more things you do, the better, the healthier your relationship will be, even if you're going through stress. It'll help you weather the storms because you're doing it together. So make sure the other person in your household is on board and knows where things go and has an idea of what needs to go in there. And the checklist can help with that. I think that's really important. Things you might not think about, put a copy of last year's tax return in there, right? Because that's going to really help you with next year's tax return. So when you do your 2021, put a copy of it in the file for next year. It won't just help you with your taxes. I've been in real estate and lending and underwriting and all that sort of stuff. You're not going to go buy a house if you're self-employed, the person who's in telehealth. Not going to be able to buy a house without those tax returns, right? You need to be able to document what you're making. Lenders aren't just going to take your word for it. They will take the word of a signed tax return. partly because the penalties are so big for you lying on that they'll take that. So put those in there. Bank records of your family's health care, if there's anything big going on, all those sort of things. Another thing the IRS would suggest, and this is changing rapidly, but they say shop for a tax preparer sooner than later. If you want to hire a tax preparer to help you, then start your search now. Don't wait till the end of the year, right? It's, I used to be in renovating properties and things, and you don't look for a roofer, at the beginning of the rainy season. You just don't do it, right? You get your roofer at the end of the rainy season when they haven't got anything else to do. They're going to do a better job and it's going to be cheaper. So look for your tax preparer now, and that person should not only be able to just prepare the taxes, but they should be able to guide you and say, you know what, if you just put some money over here, that would give you a significant tax deduction. You're paying a high percentage, and there's a lot of nuances to it, which we can't get in here right now because I'm not a tax advisor, but a good tax advisor can be worth their weight in gold in certain situations.
Yeah. Well, Rick, you mentioned paper overload and not being a fan of paper, and I know one of the things I hear repeatedly from patients and in reading about ADHD is this propensity to kind of move paper around and piles of paper. How do you get out of that?
Well, the first thing, and you practically read my mind because it's the next thing I wanted to talk about, but one way to get out of moving things is I'm a fan of this a lot of times. It's just to pause. You're busy doing something, right? Just pause for a moment and say, you know what? I'm really busy. Is this productive? Because we can be busy. We can be shuffling papers all day long. And a lot of corporate workers are. Actually, the studies are that the average corporate worker does less than 4 hours worth of actual work a day, productive work, right? The rest of the time they're shuffling papers, or they're ordering something on Amazon, or they're arguing with their landlord. There's all kinds of things going on. So I would suggest that you do that first. Just kind of introspect. Is this thing I'm really busy with? Is it a high priority or isn't it? And there's another book called Essentialism, which I really like. I wish I could think of the author's name. I can save you some time. The entire book is to ask yourself, is this essential or not? Because there's a lot of essential things to be doing. And if you're not doing something that's essential, you got to ask yourself why. And the pushback I get from people sometimes to say, well, I need my recreational time. I need to go to the beach. I need to recharge my batteries. Okay, that's essential. It's okay. Your mental health and emotional health is essential. So that, and the book is really good. I didn't mean to shortchange it, but that
that's
in a nutshell, that is it. Ask yourself, is this the highest and best use of my time? In real estate, we had the concept of, okay, we've got this property in the middle of the city. Do I really want a single family home on there? Or do I want to build a 27-story skyscraper with zoned for that, right? What's the highest and best use for this particular property? What's the highest and best use for your time at this moment? So you did lead right into it. I absolutely detest papers and paperwork. 40 years ago, they were telling us how computers were going to eliminate papers. Computers have caused a proliferation of papers. Now we can print things out, and we change a couple of things and print the whole thing out again, over and over again. I'm a fan of automating absolutely everything. We need to get out of this idea of doing and into the idea of overseeing, right? So we want to automate. You shouldn't be putting a stamp on a check anymore and sending it out. That's just old school, right? That's like riding a horse to work. We have better ways to get to work, right? So automate that. If you have a utility bill that has to be paid every month, put it on a credit card. And so you'll never be late again. You'll never pay a late fee. And if you put on a credit card instead of a debit card, you'll never pay a non-sufficient funds fee, although I know some credit cards are moving in that direction. And if you keep that balance down to zero, because it's not your money, all the emotional equations are balanced. You will be just as careful about spending money on a credit card if you keep the balance to zero, right? The problem comes when you buy that $700 kayak, which you didn't even know you wanted in the morning, and now you're making $20 a month payments. Well, you have an unbalanced equation. You have $700 worth of pleasure and $20 worth of pain. Obviously, you're going to do that again, most likely. So if you buy the thing on the credit card and pay the credit card off, now you have a balanced equation, decide whether it's worth it. So I would say automate everything that's possible. You can cut 95% of your routine issues with bills and everything out completely. You do have to spend that 5% of the time. You do have to oversee it. If your credit card expires, you will have to get in there and change those dates for them. Otherwise, they won't get their money and they won't be happy. But automate all of it. And you might not need a tax preparer. An awful lot of people don't. They, if you put everything that you have, you can use a debit card too. I'm not against it, although it's credit card's better as long as you keep it to zero. If you put all the bills on a credit card, except for your loan payments, because that by regulation, that has to come out of a demand account, like a checking account. You put all the bills on a credit card and keep the card down to zero, you never be late again. And the really good thing is you get some, and I'm not recommending any particular apps here, but you can get something like Mint, and it will basically suck that information out of your checking account and your credit card accounts and everything, and it'll crunch all the numbers for you. You have to train it a little bit, but now you've not only got all your bills automated, but now the numbers are all crunched for you. You know roughly what you're spending in different categories, which is, interesting thing to pay attention to. And now, since it's all in Mint, which I think is owned by Intuit, it's $1 billion company. I mean, if anybody knows how to protect your data, they're going to know. And if anybody can pay it, if they're liable for a breach, they can do it. So I would much rather have my information with them than in some little file cabinet in my house for someone to steal or whatever, or in my mailbox where they take things out and do identity theft. Once you have everything in Mint or another app, the next step is you can get something like TurboTax, and it can then suck all that information out of Mint and practically do your taxes for you. So you may not, if you have a simple return, you probably don't even need to pay a tax return person. All you need to do is automate all your payments, never spend cash, and train Mint to put things in the proper categories, and pay TurboTax. What, I don't even know what they charge, but they'll, whatever it is, it's better than paying somebody $250 an hour. And humans make mistakes, right? Machines make mistakes when they're trained wrong, but if something like TurboTax is wrong, they're going to figure it out really fast because there's hundreds of thousands of people using it. Your personal CPA makes mistakes. It's just human, right? We just do. I'm not saying that nothing can go wrong with an app, but it certainly can. But your odds are better that the app is going to deliver a very consistently good product. So I guess my thing there is automate everything. And if you feel the need to keep papers, then keep them, but make sure everything is stored like in the cloud. All my documents, every one of them is in the cloud. Now, there are certain ways, I get not too much anymore because I don't do the real estate lending thing anymore very much, but I would get loan apps, and they would have private information like social security numbers and addresses and names and ages and all that kind of stuff. I wouldn't just upload that into Google Docs or something, right? There are ways to get HIPAA compliant so that information is protected. But for your regular stuff, just use the cloud and put it in. That would be my suggestion.
Just thinking about, you mentioned automation, and you hear a lot about these like automated savings platforms. What do you think? I mean, does that work well for ADHD people, or just your thoughts overall?
It certainly can. It certainly can. Yes.
I know it's unrelated.
It does. It does. There's a concept called pay yourself first, which I really believe in. If your paycheck is, just to pick a number, if your paycheck is $5,000 and you pay your rent and you pay your insurance and you pay for your food and everything else, and you've got $300 left over, the chances are you're going to use that 300 somewhere, right? You're not going to use, oh my gosh, I haven't even gone out to eat with my spouse lately, so it's probably going to go away. If your check is $5,000 and you have your employer, or there's other ways to do it too, automatically move $500 into your securities account, for example, as opposed to a checking account which pays you no interest. Move it into a securities account, get it automatically invested. It's a really good way to do it, and you will learn to live on the $4,500. I do want to say though, there are people out there that they can't save 10% of their money. That's another one of those common things that's spouted all the time. Just save 10% of your money. Well, a lot of people can't do that. They would get evicted if they tried to do that. They don't have it, right? They're upside down already, or they're barely trading water. So and this depends on your time horizon, but if you're a younger person, your income is going to go up over the years. So rather than killing yourself in the beginning, right? I think people should have a life, right? They don't live a life of deprivation. But every time you get a raise, you might be able to say, you know what, I just got $100 raise. I'm going to put 50% of it off into my retirement account, whatever you want to call it. And I'm going to live on the other 50%. You'll be more motivated to get more raises, and quite frankly, the more motivated you are, the more of them you'll get, because you won't shy down. You'll ask your employer, you say, hey, I got these 3 new certifications. I'm doing a whole lot better than these other people. There's other companies that would snap me up in a second. Now, all I'm asking you to do is pay me a little bit more, and you'll get it if you negotiate correctly, frequently. So if you continually save 50% of every raise, it will be relatively painless. And in 10, 15 years, you'll be living on maybe 60% of your income, which is a very stable place to be, very stable. And you'll have a pretty good retirement account. I hate to call it that, because call it a financial freedom day account if you want. That money will be earning money. And at some point, it will overshadow your income. That's another thing, teach at Rena-Fi, but we need to wean ourselves off of being income-based and on to being asset-based sometime before we retire. The sooner the better, right? If you're dependent upon your working hours, it's a risky place to be. COVID-19, whatever it is, comes along and suddenly you're out of work along with 40 million other people. And if you put your money into a very volatile area, which you shouldn't have done if it's your reserves, now you're trying to sell it at 70 cents on the dollar. So it's complicated. But what I'm saying is, I don't think we should kill ourselves because if to save money, because it won't last. You'll do it for a few months and you'll give up, but if you pick a number, it doesn't have to be 50%. If you save a certain percentage of every increase in money you get, including windfalls, you will find yourself in very good shape in 10 to 15 years. Now, obviously, the equation's different. If you're retired on a fixed income, to do other things a little harder, but it's so much more pleasant to solve our money problems on the income side. We have to keep a lid on the spending, but most everybody that can do it will be better served to go solve it on the income side, right? One of my little mantras, you can't save your way to wealth. You just can't do it. There's only a limited amount you can do when you save money. Depending on your career and everything, you can do much faster financial remediation by earning more. Yeah. And it's not about becoming wealthy. It's about having enough so you don't think about money anymore. Money is on Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a deficiency need. Once you have enough, there's a lot of other things in life that are going to be more important to you once you have enough. But if you don't have enough, it's all you can think about. You can't be emotionally available to your kids if you're worried about someone knocking on the door with an eviction notice. Once you get past that phase, past all the deficiency needs, you get into growth needs. So again, I'm off track, but a lot of this, if we feel better about ourselves, we're going to do better. We're going to get our taxes done on time because we become a different identity. We can honestly say to ourselves, I'm a person who gets these things done. I'm a person who prepares for his taxes. I'm a person who pays these things on time and has the money available, rather than, oh my gosh, I forgot last year and I'm just that kind of person. It's going to happen again. We've abdicated control of our life at that point, and it doesn't feel good. And that's when we get all these anxiety, depressive things going on.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think one of the things we hear repeatedly, when people are diagnosed, is kind of this like recontextualization, right? You're rethinking your past, and there's some pressures you might put on yourself of like feeling like that. We always say, just gotta give yourself some grace. It's an understanding that you've developed now. So,
Yes.
So don't beat yourself up over it.
It comes down to identity. And there's another really good book, and it's just on the tip of my tongue. Maybe I'll think of it before we're done. But a lot of this is identity. Who are you as a person? I have certain affirmations that I give myself, and affirmations aren't going to work if they're just wishful thinking. They have to be true, or they have to be close to being true. And maybe you can be working towards them. But one of the things, I don't schedule too much for my workday because I know things will come at me that I don't expect. But what I do schedule, I hold myself 100% accountable with zero tolerance for failure to get done, not because everything had to be done and my world would fall apart, because it wouldn't, but because I want to be able to look in the mirror and say, I'm a person who gets things done. If you give me something to do and I agree to do it, you can count on it. And people, everything starts to work better when people can count on you, including yourself. If you don't think you're a person who gets things done and you have a to-do list of 10 things, you're really going to be holding back. Oh yeah, I know myself. It probably won't happen. And if you believe that, like Henry Ford said, if you think you can or think you can't, you're going to be right either way. So
Right. Yeah. And if you're not if the belief is I'm not the tax prepared ever,
right.
I'm always chasing it, then that's an easy narrative to keep telling yourself.
Exactly. So we change the narrative and we start creating a filing system for our taxes. And we can honestly say, I'm a person who's going to be ready for his taxes this next year. And so every time a document comes in, oh, what would that person do? That's actually another technique, is whenever you're thinking of doing something that's not maybe in your best interest, is like you can ask yourself, what would a successful person do? What would a healthy person, you're in a grocery store, what would a healthy person buy here? Right? And there's a lot of food here to choose from. What would a healthy person do? And as you become that mindset and you become, have that identity of a healthy person, you don't have to ask the question as much anymore because you are that healthy person.
Well, that's an interesting point, because I think often, we tend to either be hard on ourselves and kind of like, but if you frame it in terms of like asking yourself, that's almost more of an aspirational question, right? Like how could I tackle that in a different manner? It kind of sets the brain on a different path.
It absolutely does. And if you ask yourself at a decision point, like you're in the grocery store, then you're very likely to make the right decision. And then you're going to walk out of there feeling, oh, you know what? I am becoming that healthy person that I want to be. So the same thing with taxes and all that. A couple more things. I know we're going to be low on time, but I, was supposed to be about taxes. um, but, and I think all these things relate. I think fairly early on, you want to think about whether you're going to be itemizing your taxes or not, because there's a different form and there's different, I don't mean form, but there's different things you're going to want to be paying attention to. And that if you own a home, that interest is tax advantaged. If you have a lot of medical expenses. And they also talked about bunching tax deferred type things. If you have a fairly significant amount of medical issues and money that you've spent, it may be worth your while to actually have some procedure done in that tax year so you can add that to this fairly large list, because the deductible number is pretty high. And then the last thing that I got this from the IRS website, but stay informed. Taxes change. The administration's change, the needs change, all this stuff. So taxes change and it's not always the same. You can actually subscribe again on the IRS website to something, and I think they call it tax tips. And they'll just, they don't inundate you, but they will send you tips on that sort of thing. And then lastly, and we mentioned this in the beginning, the IRS is not horrible to talk to. Even if they were, you need to talk to them if you have a tax problem. But there's a taxpayer's bill of rights, which is also on their website. You have a certain number of rights, and the IRS, I believe, is really good about honoring all that. But if you want to make sure, read through it. Say, what do I have a right to here? People do ask me a lot about if I miss tax deadlines, because a lot of people are behind on those taxes. You have a few options if that's the case. If you're owed a refund, then you kind of want to get that filed as soon as possible. Refunds have a 3-year expiration date, I believe, unless that's changed. And so if they owe you $1,000 and you're in year 4, you're probably not getting it. It just went into the Treasury's general fund and, you're not going to see it. So that window closes 3 years after, I think, the date that return was probably due. So that's important. If you've missed the filing deadline and you owe taxes, then again, you want to file that return as quick as possible. You will continue to have penalties, both for not filing the return and for not paying the bill, right? So file the return, at least that stops those penalties. And then, call them up and get a not an offer in compromise, get an installment program going with them. And that will probably lower the interest a little bit, but you'll continue to pay the interest until you pay it. But at least you'll have it on, you won't be losing sleep anymore, right? You'll have an agreement with them that you feel you can live with. And once again, don't offer them more than you can do. They will accept what you think is a very low offer if you do it. I mean, I would offer them what you could, but don't be overly optimistic, because in our ADHD world, we are frequently overly optimistic about our money situation.
That's great advice, Rick. I mean, it really is. I think I think too often we just are scared to ask.
Yes, absolutely. And it's not just taxes, it's all kinds of things. You know, that's one of the things we talk about at Rena-Fi. People have a lot of credit card debt, for example. And this may seem a field, but I know there's people watching this that have a lot of credit card debt. If you're mired down in credit card debt and they're charging you, let's say 22% or whatever it is, and you've got good credit, except for the fact that you've got, you know, your credit utilization is really high, you can call them up. This is a negotiable thing. And you can say, you know, hey, I'm with Chase Bank and I've been with you guys for a really long time and I always pay my bills on time. You're charging me 22%. And I just got this flyer from Wells Fargo that says they'll give me 6 months with no interest and then it'll be 14% because that's the category I should be in. I really like you guys, but you guys got to give me a reason not to leave because I could transfer all this. But if you will just give me a reasonable interest rate, if you'll take my 22 and chop it down to 15, I'll stick with you. I'll be happy with that. And you'll be surprised. The first tier of customer service won't be able to do it. It's not in their playbook, but you get escalated and the next person may be able to do it. You get escalated twice, you're probably at the point where they have the authority. If they still refuse, then, you know, they've maybe called your bluff, or it might not be a bluff. Maybe you do take Wells Fargo up on it. But a lot of things that we don't think can be negotiated just because it's the big bank or whatever it happens to be, they really can be. That big bank is made up of individuals. It's a retail organization. First of all, realize that it's a retail, just like Walmart. You walk into a retail organization and there are people there that want to keep you as a customer.
I completely agree. Well, Rick, we're up at the hour, and I want to thank you very much. This has been a great conversation and really helpful in giving. Because again, I think this is one of those things where we fully are aware of the fact of how these things kind of connect together, and so really appreciate your time, all your expertise, the questions being answered, and we look forward to doing more of these with you, and covering a number of topics related to finance. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I'd love to be back, and hopefully I can see a few people over at Rena-Fi because you'll see a lot more of this. And we're not expensive. We can't do it for free, but I don't even know anymore. I'm certainly not the marketing person. You mentioned marketing in the beginning. I think we're like $69 for 6 months or something. So it's you know, whatever that is, $11 or $12 a month. And there's just a lot more of what we talked about because so many of these things, they just go so much deeper. So anyway, love to see that. And I'd be honored to come back.
Yeah, well, great. Well, we look forward to it. And thank you all for being with us tonight. Thank you for asking your questions. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon.